Well, greetings. Welcome. My name is Christian Wynn. I'm one of the ministers here at Meeting House Church. It is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight for our discussion on Bonhoeffer and democracy. This is one of the talks under our program, Faith and Justice. If you are interested in Bonhoeffer, I see a lot of folks who are in our church and also folks who are not. But if you are interested in Bonhoeffer, we're going to have another couple of events in the fall also focused on Bonhoeffer. One of the reasons for that, I think, is that Bonhoeffer is an especially helpful and useful person for processing the question of what does it mean to be politically engaged and a person of faith. And so that was really the germ idea for this talk. I learned that our speaker tonight was going to be in town, and I immediately jumped on the opportunity to have him come and speak here at this session that we're going to have. So let me say a quick prayer, and then I'll introduce our speaker, and we'll get started. Lord, we give thanks to you for this day, for the gift of life and breath, for the possibility of fellowship and love. We thank you for the witness of those who have come before and the calling that you place upon our lives to be faithful to you, to one another, and to the earth. We ask and pray now that you are with us, with our speaker, Dr. Stephen Haynes, as we process together the life and legacy of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In Jesus' name, amen. So Stephen R. Haynes, our speaker tonight, who I think he likes to go by Steve actually as well. He holds a PhD in religion and literature from Emory University and an MDiv from Columbia Theological Seminary, as well as an MA from Florida State University and his undergraduate degree at Vanderbilt. Professor Haynes has been at Rhodes College, which is in Memphis, since 1989, where he offers courses on the Holocaust, the Bible and its reception, mass incarceration, and religion and addiction. In addition to these subjects, he has research interests in areas like Jewish-Christian relations, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the biblical justifications for slavery and segregation. He has several teaching awards and other awards that are also listed on your bio here. As an outstanding faculty member in 1995, the Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Research in 2001, as well as the Clarence Day Award for Outstanding Teaching. And he has won other awards as well and been recognized in several different fields in terms of his contribution. He is also a graduate of Leadership Memphis, and since 2016, he has directed the Rhodes Liberal Arts Program in Prison program, Liberal Arts in Prison program at West Tennessee State Penitentiary. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Haynes.
Thanks, Chris. Do you go by Chris? Christian. Thanks, Christian. He didn't mention that we had a really nice dinner at the Hilltop, capped off by pecan pie. So, and he ate it with me so I wouldn't feel gluttonous. So it's really nice to be here. Thanks for the nice introduction. I am in Minneapolis this weekend to address the same topic that we'll be talking about tonight at Augsburg College on tomorrow night and then also on Friday. And the occasion is I forget exactly how it's being billed, but a sort of panel discussion tomorrow night and then a sort of workshop on teaching Bonhoeffer. And this came about because there's a journalist in Germany named Arndt Henze who contacted Lori Hale, who's at Augsburg College, but is also the president of the International Bonhoeffer Society English language section. And he had read the work that Lori and I had done. He was very concerned about the upcoming election and wanted to come to the US this summer and wondered if we would work with him, alongside him, to get our message out. So that's why I'm here. I'm thrilled that Christian invited me here tonight. Your church is huge, as you know. It's very nice. Thank you all for coming. He said to expect 20 to 30 people. I'm really glad that he was wrong about that. So this is the picture of the cover of my book. I saw there's some copies actually for sale back here. This book came out in 2018. And it's the title for my talk tonight, and with the subtitle, Why It Matters for the 2024 Election. I'll give you a hint. That's why. The guy on the right is Eric Metaxas. He may be familiar to you by name, if not by reputation. He is how to describe Metaxas? He writes about Bonhoeffer a lot, and lays claim to Bonhoeffer's legacy in ways that are very upsetting for a lot of Bonhoeffer scholars. I'll just say that. It'll become clear what I'm getting at as we go on. So why are we still talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer 80 years after his death in 1945? He's remembered today as a German pastor and professor. He's somebody who held those two vocations together in a pretty remarkable way. A brilliant and highly influential theologian. His works are still being written about, still being studied by young scholars and older scholars today. A staunch opponent of the Nazi regime from the very, very beginning. An active member of the German resistance, which started in about 1940. And this was a pretty remarkable thing for a German pastor to be involved in, and it's an interesting story. Basically, he had a brother-in-law who was a lawyer in the Abwehr, which is the sort of military counterintelligence division, and he got involved appearing to work in international circles on behalf of the Nazi regime, actually working on behalf of the resistance. He was in effect a double agent. He was a participant in a Jewish rescue operation in 1943, which has gotten a lot of attention. And for many people, he has been and continues to be a guide for Christian resistance to tyranny, whatever that happens to look like. He's somebody who took seriously his obligation as a Christian and as a German to oppose Hitler. So you may have also heard the phrase Bonhoeffer moment. How many of you have heard that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, suddenly it's coming. So this is a phrase that's been thrown around quite a bit in the last few years. And I want to talk about not only what a Bonhoeffer moment is, but how it came to be that we are using this phrase in America, since Bonhoeffer was a German, and the phrase Bonhoeffer moment doesn't really imply what we mean by that, but it's a phrase you'll hear a lot, in particular since about 1915. So I wrote a story in the Huffington Post in November of 2016. You may recall that was right after the 2016 election, which Donald Trump was elected. I remember being at the American Academy of Religion meeting. I forget where it was that year, maybe San Antonio. The International Bonhoeffer Society meets typically in conjunction with the AAR, and I remember a lot of shocked Bonhoeffer scholars, a lot of people who were really concerned about the results of the election, but also concerned about how we as scholars ought to be prepared to react if some of the things that Trump had promised came to be. For instance, you may recall a ban on Muslims, a ban on Muslim travel and things like that. Would this constitute a Bonhoeffer moment for us, that we needed to take some action? So I wrote a story for the HuffPost. In my view, it went viral. My daughter says it didn't go viral, but it had like 4,000 comments or something like that. That's the most viral I'll ever be. So this is a couple of things that I said in that op-ed piece in November 2017. Many Christians disturbed by Donald Trump's election after a campaign steeped in racism, misogyny, and xenophobia are searching for guides to faithful action. As in 2015, I'll say more about that date in a moment, those familiar with Bonhoeffer's life and legacy are wondering how the German theologian might help us negotiate these perplexing times. No one is more attentive to this question than professional Bonhoeffer scholars, so I'm kind of speaking for the Guild at this point. The first thing Bonhoeffer compels us to recognize is that Trump is not Hitler. Bonhoeffer knew Hitler and the evil he perpetrated more intimately than most Germans, eventually gaining knowledge of the crimes we associate with the Holocaust. It was this knowledge, not differences in political ideology, that led Bonhoeffer to conclude that Hitler was Antichrist and to support a series of plots to assassinate him. claiming that Trump is our Hitler, which some people were already doing at this time, may give voice to the outrage and betrayal many of us feel at the recent election results, but it neither does justice to history nor makes thoughtful analysis possible. And here's the real reason why I don't think this is helpful. It's because we do it all the time. Every time we have a president, just going back to 9/11, it may precede that, every time we have a president with whom we disagree, memes start to come out connecting them with Hitler. And everybody gets a turn, right? It was George Bush's turn for a while. Then it was Barack Obama's turn. There were several articles in magazines, prominent magazines, authors asking, why is it that people are comparing Obama to Hitler? And then there was this in Indiana. I don't know where Kendallville, Indiana is, but anyway, in 2013, somebody created a meme on a sort of plaza billboard. Yeah. So, and of course, Donald Trump was going to fall prey to this, obviously. He was going to get his turn, and guess what? So did Joe Biden. You've got all sorts of examples. I could have done pages and pages of these, but you get the idea, right? This is something we do, and we do it so often that it becomes really not very helpful to talk about our leaders as Hitlers, because it just doesn't mean much after a while. Okay. The second thing that I said that I want to rehearse with you is, second, Bonhoeffer reminds us not to be surprised by the enthusiasm with which some Christians are greeting the Trump revolution. For many Christians, Hitler's quirks and lack of refinement were overshadowed by his promises to restore law and order, reassert the church's cultural relevance, put the country back on par with its international rivals, and generally make Germany great again. Christians emerging from the economic and psychological morass of Weimar Germany were so enamored of the Nazi vision that they ignored what appeared to us as flaming red flags, perceiving only the bright dawn of German redemption. So to prove this point, oh, by the way, so how did the book come about? So after this thing went viral, I had a couple of requests to write a book based on it, which doesn't happen a lot. One of them was from a guy at Eerdmans Press, and he convinced me that it was doable. And so I set my mind to sort of fill out the op-ed piece I'd written. And in the book, I included in that book, in the back, a section called An Open Letter to Christians Who Love Bonhoeffer and Still Support Trump. This was originally written to my parents, but for reasons you'll understand, I didn't address it to my parents in the book. I addressed it to these anonymous people, but I was really thinking of my parents, who are really good people, lifelong Republicans, whom I expected would take a turn when Trump arrived and go off in another direction, but they didn't. They jumped right on the bandwagon. They're still there. And it puzzled me how my parents and other people that I knew and trusted and really respected, had, as evangelical Christians, embraced Donald Trump. So I pointed out in this article these quotes that were made by German Christian leaders around 1932, 33, 34, at the beginning of the Nazi era, in which they tried to baptize Hitler, sort of Christianize the Nazi movement in ways that would commend other Christians to support him. So you get things like this. No one could welcome January 30th, 1933. That's the day that Hitler acceded to the leadership of Germany, more profoundly, more joyfully than the German Christian leadership. In this case, German Christian refers to a particular group of pro-Nazi Christians. Hitler is the best man imaginable, a man shaped in a mold made of piety, energy, and strength of character. Hitler is the most German man, is also the most faithful, a believing Christian. We know that he begins and ends the course of his day with prayer, that he has found in the gospel the deepest source of his strength. If you're thinking, that's bullshit, you're right. This is the way Hitler was able to portray himself in the early days in particular. He was pictured with dogs and children and coming out of church and at prayer. And so there was really this successful propaganda campaign to portray Hitler as a very devout man, among other things. If the German who really believed in Jesus could find the spirit of the kingdom of God anywhere, he could find it in Hitler's movement. In the pitch black night of Christian church history, Hitler became like a wonderful transparency for our time, a window through which light fell upon the history of Christianity. God has granted us an hour of grace through Adolf Hitler. So that's just a preview of the kind of statements that Christians, devout Christians in Germany, were making about Hitler in 1933. My point is that it shouldn't surprise us if we find a similar kind of thing about Trump's coming to power in 2016. So I'll give you some quotes and the names. You're familiar with a lot of these. Michelle, but she's from Minnesota, isn't she? Yeah. I don't usually get that reaction in other parts of the country, but God raised up Donald Trump. God has righteously chosen Trump to affect the way this nation goes forward. Donald Trump represents a supernatural answer to prayer. God raised up Trump for such a time as this. Donald Trump actively seeks God's guidance in his life. And you see some parallels here, this idea, really imagining, projecting a devout Christian where there isn't one. Honestly, I mean, I think we can agree on that, whatever our politics are. I mean, Trump is really bad at faking Christianity. We have seen that. And yet people were really wanting this to be true. Trump's victory showed clear evidence of the hand of God on the election. Trump is a bold man, a strong man, an obedient man. If you know anything about evangelical Christianity, these names are familiar. They're sort of the influencers of American evangelicalism. I see this as a last-minute reprieve for America and the church. Trump does look like he's the last hope. God was raising up Donald Trump as he did the Persian king Cyrus the Great. This is a little interesting twist because Cyrus the Great was not a Jew. He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't somebody that, when Isaiah says that God is raising up Cyrus as his agent, he wasn't making the claim that Cyrus was a devout person. He was just saying God was using him to punish Israel. This is basically the argument that some Christians have made. Yeah, he's not a Christian, but he's like Cyrus. He's an outsider who needs to be brought in at this very moment to clean house. So that's what that's about. Trump is a man of faith, truly committed to making America great again through principles that honor God and rather than defy him. And this one is really resonant with one of the quotes in the earlier thing, right, about this moment in history, this dawning. In the midst of despair came November the 8th, 2016. Remember the mention of January 30th, 1933? It's very similar. It was on that day that God declared that the people, not the pollsters, were going to choose the next president of the United States. Robert Jeffress is a Baptist minister in Dallas. So, as one of the things I did in the book, I tried to make it clear that I thought in that letter that the evangelical Christianity that I grew up in and that I still have a lot of compassion for and connection with was making a huge mistake in throwing its weight behind Trump, and that it was really ruining the brand, honestly, of evangelical Christianity, and probably damaging itself in a way that was not going to be reparable. So my book was reviewed in Christianity Today, which is an evangelical magazine, and it was reviewed well, but I want to point out to you something about the review that I found frustrating at the time, and I think I would really react against today. Justice Metaxas, so Eric Metaxas is in my book is kind of my nemesis, is the person whose views of Bonhoeffer I'm trying to identify as mistaken and misleading and correct. Justice Metaxas wants to rescue Bonhoeffer from the liberals in the academy. Haynes makes clear that he wants to liberate those evangelicals he sees as captive to Donald Trump. That effort complicates his attempt to rescue Bonhoeffer from misuse. In other words, I have my own agenda, just like Metaxas does. Indeed, he reveals that he long argued for an open door to Metaxas and the possibility of conversation that is within the International Bonhoeffer Society, but he now believes that studied academic attachment is irresponsible. His open letter at the back of the book will likely fail to convince any true political believers. And that may be true. And this is the conclusion of her review. Laura Fabricki is the author. Haynes has done a valiant job of taking stock of the varied elements of our American idea of Bonhoeffer, but sadly we can only see ourselves in such pixelated, polarized images. If anything, Learning more about Bonhoeffer's life and time should motivate us to live more prudently, courageously, and responsibly within our own. That is Haynes' stated hope, but it is also Metaxas'. So the battle continues. The way I read that is, this is really kind of a pointless exercise. We keep doing that. One person claims them on the right, another person claims them on the left. There's really no objective middle ground, so this is just sort of an academic exercise. To me, what's at stake is too important to look at it that way. I see myself as an advocate, as an activist, as much as a Bonhoeffer scholar at this moment, because Eric Metaxas has become unhinged, in case you don't follow him. So he's not only somebody who is misrepresenting Bonhoeffer, in my view, but he's somebody who's become a Trump dead-ender in every sense of that word. So he's election was stolen, willing to die in the fight, he said on live radio, willing to die in the fight to overturn the election, was behind the movement around January 6th and all that, is being sued by Dominion Voting Systems, as Fox News was, for the things he said about one of their executives. So he's in a little bit of trouble. But he is much more than a Bonhoeffer author. He's somebody who has become an influencer, an American influencer, and has a lot of media that he works in. Okay, so talk about Metaxas a little bit. He came on the scene in 2010 with a book called Bonhoeffer. A lot of us who are Bonhoeffer scholars were very interested in this guy. We'd never heard of him, but he wrote a huge book, a biography. There's actually was a biography, a definitive biography that was written in the 60s, I think, and then retranslated into English around 2000 by Eberhard Bethge, who was Bonhoeffer's best friend. So one would think it would be seen as trustworthy, reliable. But Metaxas comes in and he writes a new Bonhoeffer biography, and he basically says everything you've ever heard about Bonhoeffer is wrong. Everything Bonhoeffer scholars have said and gotten you to believe that Bonhoeffer is misleading. It was subtitled Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, and Spy. The book has sold over 1 million copies. So if you added up all the books that Bonhoeffer scholars have written since 1945 and counted every sale, they would not make up 1 million copies, I'm quite sure, right? This is something way, way beyond the kind of influence that any of us have. And so obviously, Metaxas is a successful author. He found a formula that was really worked. I think his formula is basically taking people who address the 20th century's great moral crimes and make the case that there was a Christian who was on the right side of it. So his other book, you may know, his other early biography was about William Wilberforce. And his claim was that Wilberforce represents a Christian who was against slavery from the beginning, against the slave trade. And when somebody argues, well, Christians were pro-slavery, you can pull out William Wilberforce. I think the same is true for the way Metaxas sees Bonhoeffer. The Holocaust, we all know about. There is a lot of evidence that Christianity was complicit in the Holocaust. How do you make the case that Christians were on the right side of things? Well, you pull out a Bonhoeffer who rescued Jews, right? So this he did in 2010, very successful book. So this is why so many Bonhoeffer-loving Christians embrace Donald Trump, because they've had permission given to them to do so by lots of evangelical leaders. We saw their names, but particularly by somebody who seems to know a lot about Bonhoeffer, who wrote a big book about him. So he must be trustworthy. Okay. The response by Bonhoeffer scholars was what you would expect. Here are some titles. You get the sense from these that they're not complimentary, right, of the book. Basically, the idea is that what Metaxas did is he didn't do a lot of research, he didn't read a lot of primary sources, but he tried to refashion Bonhoeffer in a package that would be attractive to American evangelicals. Instead of presenting Bonhoeffer as somebody who was really a product of liberal theology in the German academy, but then was influenced by Karl Barth, which was more of an Orthodox influence, He's simply an evangelical straight down the line. And so he wants to really remake Bonhoeffer in his own image, and an image that is going to be attractive to a lot of Americans. So here are a couple of things that Metaxas does that signals that he has no idea what he's talking about, okay? On January 30th, 1933 at noon, Adolf Hitler became the democratically elected Chancellor of Germany. Anybody who knows anything about German history knows that Hitler was never elected. The Nazis never had an electoral majority. He was appointed as Chancellor and later consolidated that, after von Hindenburg died, consolidated that office with the office of President. You don't make a mistake about, I don't know how you make a mistake like that, but it clearly indicates his level of reliability. And the other one, maybe not as well known, the Barmen Declaration, which was written by confessing church Germans in 1934, was an attempt to at least oppose the sort of pro-Hitler faction within the Protestant church. The Barmen Declaration repudiated anti-Semitism. So this is precisely what it didn't do. It did not mention Jews. It did not mention anti-Semitism. In fact, the author of the document, Karl Barth, admitted in much in the 1960s and explained the reason he didn't is because nobody would have signed it if he'd even mentioned Jews. So this is an example of the kind of errors that Metaxas made that made Bonhoeffer scholars stand up and go, wait a minute, you're completely misrepresenting this important scholar. So you've got the book, and the book is bad. It's not terrible. It's a good read. I've read it a couple times. But then you've got the press campaign that followed, and this is where things really went off the tracks. Metaxas is very telegenic. He likes to talk. He likes to market himself. Perhaps you've seen him online or on TV. And he likes to present the interviewer with sound bites. So here's a couple sound bites. Bonhoeffer is more like a theologically conservative evangelical than anything else. That's really kind of making something that's pretty murky, pretending like it's very clear. It's not. Why are we confused about that? Because Bonhoeffer scholars, theological liberals, by definition, every Bonhoeffer scholar is a theological liberal and a cultural Marxist. So you're looking at a cultural Marxist, just FYI, have made Bonhoeffer in their own image. So he's taking what he's actually doing, which is making Bonhoeffer in his own image, and saying the reason it looks strange is because all you've gotten up to this point is Bonhoeffer scholars doing the same thing. You remember Glenn Beck? I don't know where he's gone, but he used to have a TV show on Fox, so Metaxas, of course, was on that show. Metaxas says the German churches failed to resist Nazism because they were under the influence of theological liberalism. It's a little misleading. It's a little, what's the word, glib, yeah? And so Beck says, in many ways, that's what we have here now. And so Metaxas takes the bait. Absolutely, the parallels to the US are stunning. So this became Metaxas' mantra really in 2010, right up to 2016, that we're living in an American version of Weimar Germany. It's 1932 or 33. The Nazis are on the move. Now the Nazis at this point were represented by Barack Obama, the Democratic Party, the Supreme Court. And if we don't do something, we're going to lose our democracy. We're going to be in the same place where the German churches were when they couldn't do anything to stop the Nazi movement. So this is still 2010. The question facing Germans in the 1930s was the very one facing Americans today, the very, very one. When do state concerns begin encroaching on the authority of the church to a point where the church needs to shout halt? So for Metaxas, the Nazi threat really is indicated when there's a loss of religious freedom. And so if people can't discriminate based on their religious views, if they're forced to jump ahead a little bit, if they're forced to have virtual church during a pandemic, that's the government overstepping the same way the Nazis did. Oh, I think I just went silent. Hold on. It's back. By the way, I meant to say, if you have a question, please ask it. You can raise your hand, or you can just blurt it out, and I'll stop. Yeah, so did that one. So Catholic News Agency around the same time, just as the Third Reich bullied the German church. The U.S. government is bullying the church on the issues of sexuality, abortion, euthanasia, and stem cell research. We do well to take our lead from Bonhoeffer. Well, what does that mean to say in 2010? It's really unclear, right? It's going to become clear as we go forward. In 2011, Metaxas writes, Bonhoeffer faced a church that had bowed its knee to the reigning culture, but we are facing that today as well. And so he is arguing that the Manhattan Declaration, which I won't get into, but it was a declaration against abortion, against any kind of attempt to limit, to curtail life, the way that Metaxas would explain it, it was a moment of crisis for the church. They needed to speak out just like they did in 1934. The sort of turning point, I think, for Metaxas in terms of his notoriety, I think that's the right word, notoriety came in 2012. He somehow was asked to speak at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington. Obama was president. He gave a copy of his book to Obama, but then he basically got up and gave a speech which was really shaming to Obama and to Obama's views. And I'll just give you a snippet, because the thing he said that really caught on with other people was, this is a Bonhoeffer moment. We must humbly ask God, cry out, Lord, lead us. And he was speaking about how something needed to be done about abortion in America. But this idea of a Bonhoeffer moment really took off after 2012, and Metaxas kind of fueled that. So more parallels. It's because of Bonhoeffer that I find myself thinking about the issue of religious freedom. So Metaxas goes from being a Bonhoeffer author to being a sort of political celebrity on the right. And so now it's not just he's talking about Bonhoeffer with people in groups like this. He's talking about Bonhoeffer on the Glenn Beck Show. He's talking about Bonhoeffer at CPAC, at the Conservative Political Action Community, at the Washington Prayer Breakfast. So Bonhoeffer is getting a lot of attention, which for Bonhoeffer scholars would normally be a really good thing. But it's getting the kind of attention, as John Matthews will tell you, who's walked in, the kind of that makes us nervous, right? I actually heard this with my own ears. I was listening to American Family Radio at the time. I really believe the story of Bonhoeffer is the gift of God to the American church today. This was in 2015. And so he's sort of ramping up this idea that we're at this turning point. It's Weimar, it's 1933, something has to be done. If the church does not wake up, it's game over, and so forth. Okay, so then 2015 happened. You may remember this. There's been a lot going on in the last decade. I wouldn't blame you if you kind of forgot about this, but this was a Supreme Court case about same-sex marriage. It was quite controversial. It became clear in March, for some reason, that in June, the Supreme Court would rule in favor of what would rule against, would strike down laws against same-sex marriage, state laws. It became obvious that was going to happen, and so the religious right really started to mobilize. And so there were a number of people who, maybe names you haven't heard of, but very influential on the right, who started to really talk about what this would mean when it came down. We believe that the majority of the court ruled in favor of elevating what we've always taught to be a sinful lifestyle to the stature of a civil right, and I'll spare you the rest, but the punchline is we are approaching a Bonhoeffer moment in America. So this idea of Bonhoeffer moment that Metaxas had used and sort of popularized suddenly becomes a rallying cry against the Supreme Court decision. It's used by another well-known religious right figure. We all stand together or we hang separately. This is indeed a Bonhoeffer moment. Let me just pause to point out that people who use the phrase Bonhoeffer moment don't explain what it means. It's a little frustrating. So we have to sort of infer, right? This is the closest that I've seen to somebody saying this is actually what it means. It means violence. It means being willing to die. And it makes sense because that's what Bonhoeffer did, but nobody ever really fills out, what they're asking us to do, just using the term. And the thing really exploded, and I mean exploded, I saw this on the Rachel Maddow show, so that gives you some idea of how far it went. This is Ronnie Floyd, who was elected to be president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Is that the language? Anyway, head for that year. This could be a watershed moment in our history, blah, 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 blah. This is a Bonhoeffer moment for every pastor in the United States. We bow down to culture, or will we stand for the Word of God? And I remember Rachel Maddow trying to sort this out and going, wait, what is he saying? This is a kill Hitler moment because we now have same-sex marriage is not, cannot be illegal. So now we assassinate our president, and that's really kind of what was going on. So.
But this is all in the context for my friends that are evangelical MAGA people believing that America's meant to be God's country.
Yeah.
And that liberals like me are what they call Satan under the tent. Because I'm woke and I bless same-sex marriages, I'm bringing God's condemnation on America. And liberalism and the whole liberal democratic process is threatening what God wanted for America.
Yeah.
And we are in this Bonhoeffer moment because if we don't stop people like you, God's going to bring wrath on America, and we have to stand up and fight you.
Yeah. Thank you. You didn't use the phrase Christian nationalism, but that is part and parcel, right? That this idea, this is a Christian nation, it's lost its Christian roots, they've become atrophied, we got to get them back. So it sort of relates to what you were saying. But you're right, this is, for them, an existential crisis.
It's a religious existential crisis that they feel righteous
in
what they're saying.
They're doing God's work, and there's no question in my mind. I don't know what makes Metaxas tick. He's a little crazy, but he is convinced that he's doing the work of God, that God told him to write a book on Bonhoeffer, God told him to make a movie, God told him to do this and that, and it's hard to argue with somebody like that, right? Jeff, did you have something? No, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to jump ahead, but it seems to me. I can talk loud enough. It seems to me that kind of the primary issue here is, so what about theology and what good does it do? Because if you view theology as having a corrective role in the culture and in the church, I'm perplexed by how you do that. I mean, I would ultimately argue this is mostly psychological in nature and not theological, what you described. Eric is just simply a narcissist and Trump is a psychopath.
I don't disagree with what you just said.
I've evaluated many psychopaths.
I think for Bonhoeffer scholars, we have to believe that the history and the theology matters. And so maybe we can't do anything about a narcissist on the loose like Metaxas, but we can point out the mistakes in his book, the mistakes in his theological portrait that he draws about Bonhoeffer, right? And that we can do, that we're prepared to do. And if we do that with enough people who might be predisposed to trust Metaxas, we can start to sow some seeds of doubt, and maybe that's a good thing.
And so how would you do that?
Let's wait till the end.
Okay.
I'll be thinking about that question as we go forward. So no surprise, Metaxas ended up getting on the Trump train in 2016. When one of those is on, this automatically goes off, and vice versa. I don't know why that is, but I just noticed. So, yeah. So Trump started to make a kind of apologetic pitch for Trump very early on. This is, I think, summer 2016. Despite his foibles, peccadillos, and metaphorical warts, he's the last best hope of keeping America from sliding into the oblivion. He really believed, he tried to convince people that Hitler was what he called her, a Hillary Clinton presidency was the end of America as we knew it. So he would, and he kept doubling down. God raised up Bonhoeffer to blow the trumpet and call God's people. So it's like you said, right? This is not about us. This is about God intervening. Thank God for that. And then came the October surprise. This is the quintessential October surprise. This is the worst. If you're a Trump, campaign person, it's the worst thing you can imagine, right? I think it was September, October that this came out. And so what do? Well, one thing you do is you get, one thing you're really afraid of is the evangelical vote is going to melt away at this point. So how do you keep that from happening? You get Merrick Metaxas to write a op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, which elicits the memory of Bonhoeffer, and encourages people, frees people up to vote for Trump anyway, despite all the things they've learned. This is what he says. The anti-Nazi martyr Dietrich Bonhoeffer also did things most Christians of his day were disgusted by. Okay, so now, just in case you missed it, he's comparing Bonhoeffer and Trump. Okay, this is what he's doing. He infamously joined a plot to kill the head of his government. He was sort of like, misogyny, political resistance, pretty much the same thing. He was horrified by it, but he did it nonetheless because he knew that to stay morally pure would allow the murder millions to continue. So you see where he's going with this. And it's hard to quantify something like this, but I really think this is the argument I make in the book, if Metaxas had, at this point, October, had pulled back or had said, as a Christian, I can't support this guy, I really think it would have swung the election. I think he had that much influence in the evangelical vote, which was even higher than it had been for the Republican candidate that had been in previous electoral seasons. And then he ends with, not to vote is to vote, God will not hold us guiltless. This is a play on a phrase that he made up, but attributed to Bonhoeffer. And he still won't acknowledge that he made it up, that it's not Bonhoeffer. He still uses it. You may have heard it. Silence in the face of evil is silence itself, is evil itself. Not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. That's Metaxas, not Bonhoeffer.
Both sides would use that
Yes.
rhetoric
Yeah.
today.
And I talk about that in the book. The left has its Bonhoeffer moment in 2017 at Charlottesville. Is that 2017 or 18? Yes. That's when, things kind of shifted and people said, here's where Bonhoeffer fits in. So you're right about that. So where are the Bonhoeffer scholars? So in 2017, February, we decided to say something. We decided we've got to say something. What to say wasn't that clear. We said a lot of stuff. I'll give you a couple of examples. We pointed out that Bonhoeffer in 1933 had warned that leaders easily become misleaders, that when a government persecutes its minorities, it has ceased to govern legitimately. He admonished Christians to speak out for those who cannot speak. So we tried to look at actual Bonhoeffer theological statements to correct this idea that Bonhoeffer was somehow like Trump. This is the response that we got. So Sojourners is a sort of left-wing, evangelical left journal. So the statement appeared there, and this was the response by Metaxas. The culturally Marxist academics who hijacked Bonhoeffer's legacy for 50 years until the 2009 publication of my biography, and who unconscionably, not unconsciously, don't misread that, unconscionably pushed a profound misreading of his thinking and theology, are at it again, feel free to guffaw. I don't know what a cultural Marxist is. I have a friend who's an actual Marxist, and I asked him what a cultural Marxist was, and he said, I don't really know. I don't know what to tell you. But apparently, I and John Matthews and Christopher and others, are cultural Marxists. So this is how you dismiss criticism, a difference of opinion about Bonhoeffer. Is you say anybody who claims to know anything about Bonhoeffer is actually an ideologue. Notice what's going on here is sort of a populist thing, right? Credentials are not respected. Just because the people who are, function as Bonhoeffer scholars have PhDs in that field doesn't mean you should trust them. In fact, you probably shouldn't trust them. The person you should trust is Metaxas, who, has a BA from Yale at English. I don't know how that makes him a Bonhoeffer, authority. But this is the kind of, I think populism is the right word, the kind of anti-intellectualism, anti-institutional vibe that we get from Metaxas as well. Okay. So then there was, we're jumping ahead a little bit to 2021. There was the Jericho March. This was actually, maybe it was even late December. At any rate, it was after the 2020 election, before January 6th. There was a movement among Christians and a few other figures like Michael Flynn to reverse the election. And the way it was going to happen was Christians would march 7 times around the Capitol building, just as they did at Jericho, the Israelites did at Jericho from the book of Joshua. And Metaxas was the MC for this. And this is where you see his unhinged character start to really show. He says, as I mentioned on live radio, Trump calls in, he says, I'm willing to die in this fight, whatever it is, whatever it takes. This has obviously, been a stolen election and so forth. There's a movie that comes out in 2022 called 2,000 Mules. Anybody seen it or heard of it? I hope you haven't heard of it, but if you have, this is an attempt to explain exactly how the election was stolen. It was stolen because there were these people called mules who carried around ballots, false ballots, and stuffed them in the mailboxes. And somehow somebody decided that they could document this using cell phone GPS data. Well, it takes about 3 minutes for somebody who knows something about GPS data to realize this is all crazy. And this movie, 2,000 Mules, and Metaxas was a big celebrant of this movie. The movie has been repudiated by the people who made it because they're being sued by Dominion and other people. But this was, the damage was done. 2023, Metaxas starts saying things like, any Christian not actively revolting over LGBTQ stuff it's just like Nazi Germany. So at this point, everything's just like Nazi Germany, everything that he doesn't like. This might have been the moment where I almost just want to throw up my hands and say, this is hopeless. I don't know why I'm continuing. Metaxas sees no difference between Biden and Hitler. This is what he actually said on the air. At least Hitler was elected. Biden had to steal the election. That's the difference between Biden and Hitler, the only one I can think of. There's so much wrong with this, starting with Hitler wasn't elected, but let's just skip that. He still hasn't learned that lesson. But, Biden as Hitler, and it's just, this is not the way a scholar talks, no matter how exercised they happen to be. This is the way a demagogue talks. And so you have a demagogue in the clothing of a scholar, which is a really dangerous thing. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little film clip, because when we get to 2024, well, there's a book that he published in 2022 called Letter to the American Church. And everything I've been telling you is made clear in that book. And then he turned the book into a movie in 2024, and it showed, anybody heard of it or seen it? Good. It went to a lot of churches, some theaters. This is Metaxas introducing it. Sorry.
I'm convinced that the American church has arrived at a significant moment.
I want you to be able to see it too. I don't know why it's not happening. Oopsie. Well, maybe you can just listen.
Of truth.
We are only 75, 80 years removed from 3 separate regimes that killed 60 to 70 million people intentionally.
The parallels with where the American church is now to where the German church stood in the face of the Nazi regime are unavoidable and grim.
Churches need to understand really what Marxism is, which is to destroy the church, to destroy the Word of God.
So if you capture the seminaries, you capture the pastors, you capture the laity, you capture the soul of the world.
Christianity is not just about saying Jesus loves you and then going to heaven one day, but that there's a war that's raging.
The church is weakening, which is why Marxism is ascendant in America today.
This is the hour of the American church.
Sorry you couldn't see it. The terrifying, imagine terrifying images of terrible things happening. What did you hear?
Steve, whenever someone speaks, just be sure to repeat it, just so everybody can hear it.
What did you hear? Yeah, you better believe we do. This is the Bonhoeffer moment, right? And what is it that's threatening us that we need to respond to?
Well, it seemed to that he painted like seminary professors and
Yeah.
pastors and such, that that they don't, if they're not in line with this agenda, then he's pre-painted them as,
Right.
painted them as part of the enemy.
Yeah. So seminary professors, pastors, even lay people, yeah, are part of the problem because they're unaware of what's happening. What is happening? What's the word that he uses to describe? It's Marxism. So you have this.
When did we go past socialism?
I don't know. When did we go past liberalism, for God's sake? There's this conflation of, and I've seen this in his writings about Bonhoeffer scholars, this conflation of liberalism and Marxism that's really interesting. So anybody that's more liberal than him theologically is a cultural Marxist. It just sort of is a slippery slope. So this is the kind of thing that obviously scares people to death if they're prone to listen to this kind of thing. And again, Metaxas seems like he must know what he's talking about, right? He's a Bonhoeffer scholar and all that. So let me see if I can get this to go back.
He does have the largest book.
He does have the largest book. It's a good point. Why is it not doing this? Huh. If somebody wants to ask a question, this would be a great time.
Isn't there a sense in which we who are on the left sometimes use words that are easily used pejoratively without explaining? When I say somebody is sexist, they're racist, they're homophobes, they're Islamophobes.
I don't know why it's not doing that. What are you saying? Oh.
And I don't have to explain what I mean by the terms because the terms themselves carry a negative connotation. And Marxism, socialism, liberalism carry the same.
Do I need to repeat that, or did everybody hear it?
Repeat your thought on language.
Yeah, so I think the question was, don't liberals sometimes do the same things with language? That is, take blanket terms that may or may not apply in a particular circumstance, like sexism, misogyny, racism, classism, and throw them around in ways that are irresponsible, or don't give people a chance to explain themselves. That's a good point, yeah. So Letter to the American Church is a book that came out in 2022, and I won't try to tell you everything he says, but I'll give you a summary, and then we can have an open discussion. So he is trying to communicate, I guess, to people who read books more than they watch Fox News, so it's a little more thoughtful. And he tries to recreate the church struggle of the German of 1933-34. So the church struggle in Germany was basically a struggle over how Nazified the church would be. There was about a third of the German pastors, called German Christians, who really wanted to go all out and show Hitler that the church could back the Nazi movement, and they wanted to have swastikas in the church, and they wanted to take loyalty oaths to Hitler and all this stuff. And so that was one faction. And there was a faction who thought church and state were separate realms, separate kingdoms, as Luther put it, and you could be over here and be a good German and even be a patriot, but not have to be a Nazi. And then there was the group in the middle, which is sort of caught. They were sometimes called the intact churches, or the churches who hadn't really chosen sides. And what Metaxas does is say that middle group, that middle third, are the reason the Holocaust happened. You with me? It seemed to take a big jump, I know. But the reason Nazism was successful is that the church didn't stop it in 1933. And if the third of people over here in this camp, the confessing church, the people who are opposed enough to Nazism to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, you can't Nazify the church, if everybody had been in that camp, if 2/3 had been in that camp rather than 1/3, Nazism would have stopped, 6 million Jews would be alive and all that. So it's a very simplistic reading of the church struggle, not surprisingly. It assumes that the church had that power to sort of derail Nazism. It also assumes that the group over here were really anti-Nazi enough to, even if they had a majority, to do anything significant. I mean, as I told you, Karl Barth, who was the leader of the confessing church, acknowledged in the 1960s, if I had written anything that even mentioned Jews, nobody in the confessing church would have signed it. That's the good guys. Nobody in the good guy camp would have signed it. That's how anti-Semitism has sort of seeped into the church. And Bonhoeffer was, one of the reasons he was sort of ostracized even in the confessing church was he really took seriously the possibility that the church might have to resist the state. No other Germans were saying that or even listening to that, and that's the confessing church. So the idea that even if they had more people, they would have resisted the state, very unlikely. But this is his, yeah. So already in 1933, Bonhoeffer writes this essay called "The Church and the Jewish Question," and the sort of punchline is that under certain circumstances in which the state fails to do what God has put it on earth to do, the church may have to, John, maybe you remember the exact language, the church may have to jam a spoke in the wheel of the state. So what does that look like? That's a metaphor. But obviously that's physical resistance, right? Might have to do something to make the state stop or at least slow down. And he's saying this in April of 1933. Nobody is thinking that in April of 33. So he's already contemplating the possibility that this might get bloody. So even if it's really difficult to imagine how you get more Bonhoeffers than there were, because it was such a radical position, even in the confessing church. But Metaxas wants us to believe that the reason Nazism happened, the reason Holocaust happened, is because the church, the Protestant church in particular, didn't act in a particular way in 1933. And the importance of that is, this is the moment of the American church. And we are faced with the same dilemma, the same challenge that the German church was. We can act, or we can sort of sit back and watch what happens, or say we're not political. But if we sit back, terrible, terrible things are going to happen on the same scale that happened then. Does that make sense? And let's face it, if you take him as a credible witness, that's scary, right? It makes you want to do something. Yeah?
Isn't it true that well, a couple of things.
Yeah.
First of all, the Nazis put real pressure on the leaders of the church, and I think some of those leaders didn't want to lose their positions.
Yeah.
And so they were looking out for themselves,
Yeah.
not for what was moral and right. And then secondly, the church was not really separate from the German state. It was funded by taxes.
A complicated relationship with
Right.
the state, yeah.
And so it isn't like the American church at all.
Right. You wouldn't learn that from reading Metaxas' book, right? And pastors were state employees. They got paid by the state. So the state would collect church taxes and pay them. So you can imagine this idea of questioning a pastor's loyalty to the state was very tricky. And even in 1938, when it became clear what Nazism was about, there were a lot of people, even in the confessing church, who signed a loyalty oath to Hitler because they didn't want to lose their pension or didn't want to lose their job, didn't want to lose their pay. Understandable. Yeah. Somebody else who hasn't had a chance to contribute, make a comment. Yeah.
This is interesting because I read Eric Metaxas' book, but I didn't know who he was. And I would make the assumption that he was a theologian.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about this whole discussion, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but it's like somebody who wrote a biography of James Madison and now goes around as if they're a constitutional scholar.
Would that happen?
I don't understand why all he talks about
Yeah.
the church when he wrote a biography of Eric Bonhoeffer. I don't know, that's strange.
Yeah. Yeah. How is it that Metaxas passes as a Bonhoeffer scholar, given everything we've said? And I just wonder, would that happen with a Madison scholar? Would they be able to pass the way he does? Maybe within church circles, if you use certain language, it sort of gives you a patina of credibility.
Constitutional law.
No, that's right.
It just seems so weird.
And he wouldn't get by with it in a seminary classroom or in a place where scholars gather, but he ain't going to those places. And I say that because I was one of the people who said when he first was writing, we need to invite him to the International Bonhoeffer Society, we need to engage him in dialogue. He was not interested. He wasn't interested in the kind of give and take, which is what we do. So, update, this is like the last couple of months on this question of where Bonhoeffer fits into this whole thing. An article in the American Reformer, Mark Devine, who is a Bonhoeffer scholar of some sort in Birmingham, works at Samford University. He's responding to somebody who said, how can Christians still support Trump? This is what he says, because the Democrat Party is evil. Trump is the only instrument to hand who demonstrates strength and courage to take them on, and I hope for a day when there's no need for Donald Trump on the national scene. Kind of that Cyrus trope that we were talking about. So this is how people are defending Trump in that this is post-conviction. Okay, so this is since May 30th or whenever that was. Here's an article that came out in May about Christian nationalism. Is it really Christian? What would the confessing church have said about it? We can't ask Karl Barth and the other bekennende Christen, the confessors, to tell us what to do in America in 24, but we can benefit from Barmen courage and willingness to draw out public implications of familiar theological commitments. Nobody at Barmen could foresee that Nazi hate speech would lead to concentration camps, firing squads, gas chambers, mass graves in World War II, but Americans 24 must ask, what might happen here? So this is a sort of attempt on the other side to say, in a way, Metaxas is right. There are some scary things on the horizon. He's just not looking in the right direction. Yeah?
What's so interesting to me is Nazism and Hitler were about purifying Germany and getting rid of people who were poisoning the blood.
Right.
Liberals in America, the Christian nationalists fight against, are those of us who say gay people should have the same rights, Native Americans should have the same rights, immigrants should have the same rights. We are about including more people into the community. Hitler was about expunging people in the community. They should not be a part of the community.
Yeah, and that's not the only difference. Right?
No.
It sort of defies, because there are people who really believe that the Democrat Party, as it's currently sort of constructed, is a fascist party. Now, those people didn't pay attention in college, politics, because that's not what fascism is. But it linguistically, rhetorically, it works for them. A couple more examples. I've developed a new appreciation for Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the battles he fought in 30s Nazi Germany. Those battles were much more significant than anything we face at this time, but the challenge remains the same. I'm reminded daily of this famous quote. And this is by a conservative, somebody who actually, the article's about book banning and why it's so important to keep certain books out of the hands of kids. And you see where she ends it with? A quote from Bonhoeffer, she thinks, but actually not from Bonhoeffer, from Metaxas. So Metaxas has successfully created a quote and then sort of attributed to Bonhoeffer, and people accepted that. Republicans who play nice with lawless persecutors are today's good German generals. This is from the Stream. I don't know what to say about this guy, John Zmirak. I hope you're not familiar with him, but he quotes Metaxas. So basically, anybody who doesn't support I don't know, what is this about? I'm going to read it. They knew he was leading their beloved country to ruin, but wouldn't take action because they sworn. So anybody who's not taking action against Biden right now, anybody who's not resisting to the point of bloodshed against Biden, clearly doesn't understand the lessons of the Nazi era.
What does Madeleine Albright's book on fascism?
I don't know. I forgot. The question is, where does Madeleine Albright's book on fascism fit in? And the answer is, I don't know. Yeah.
She wrote that just before the 16 election.
Can you put all this in an historical context within, go all the way back to the early 70s with Lewis Powell's memo? You know, the memo that he wrote as an attorney for the Chamber of Commerce?
No,
Really
I can't.
said, well, it's important. Because
Tell me.
Said, well, you can find this on the internet,
microphone.
It's all over the place.
There's a lot of stuff on the internet I don't know about, so it'd be helpful.
Well, this is important.
Okay, tell us.
We all know Lewis Powell was Supreme Court Justice appointed by Nixon in 1973, but in 1971 he was an attorney
for the National Chamber of Commerce in New Jersey. That's where they were based at the time. And he wrote a 17-page memo that really covered just about everything we have going on now about how corporations have to dominate this society because of what had happened in the previous 20 years, all the way back to Roosevelt. All right? And I would recommend just look in the Lewis Powell memo. You'll find all these categories, how to infiltrate the schools, the colleges and universities. Heritage Foundations was funded, corporations, that's how they all got into politics. That's the one aspect. The other aspect is the rise of the moral majority in the early 80s and Ronald Reagan, right? And you know, I've been listening to Metaxas off and on the radio. He's had a radio program for a long time. Michelle Bachmann went to Regis College. I heard her on the radio when she just became a congresswoman. She talked about America as a Christian nation. Where did she go to school? Regent's College back in Virginia. So I see Metaxas, and I agree with everything you're saying, and I find that fascinating. But that's what I'm asking you, is how does that fit into this, and I hate to use the words conspiracy, but it has been a corporate, and we found the Christians and the corporations had found someone who was perfect for them because he's a transactional businessman. As you can't tell, I grew up in New York. Anyone who grew up in New York City, knows all about the Trumps and everything that they stand for or don't stand for. So that's why I'm asking you about where does this fit into that context of this 40 years? The Federalist Society was founded in 1981 in Yale University, all right? And now we have these people on the Supreme Court and over 200 federal judges that were appointed by Trump when he was in office, right? And Trump no longer used the American Bar Association. He used the Federalist Society to certify his nominations.
So I don't think I can improve on that, so I'm just going to let it stand. Thank you for giving us a broader historical context. Obviously, this stuff is tied up with a lot of our history.
But again, it seems to me the issue is, so where does the church go from here? I mean, we can, bitch and be upset and angry and everything else about this, but what's the plan? What's the new paradigm in terms of confronting this? And, that's, to me, where this...
I think about that a lot, and I don't know the answer. One of the problems is that we tend to
that's not good enough.
I became a professor so I could ask questions, not answer them, right? We seem to self-select in institutions, right? So maybe this is not the case in your church or churches but they tend to be on one side or the other. So we don't really talk to each other. We listen to each other maybe on the radio, or we have family members we can't escape, but we don't really engage. I go to a church that has a lot of theological and political diversity. It's unusual. And we've been able to hold it together, although a turning point came. We lost about 200 members when we put up a Black Lives Matter banner outside the church in 2020. That was a tipping point for some people. But most churches aren't like that, right? We talk to each other. We know, we feel free to talk because we know we agree with each other. Right? So that's part of the problem, is breaking out of our silos. One of the things that was hard to read in the review of my book was that this probably won't convince, it's great, but it won't convince anybody. Because I had written it to really change people's minds. Eerdmans was adamant they wanted it to come out before the midterm elections in 2018, so I busted it to try to get it out. And then to read the review, it probably didn't change anybody's mind, which may be true. Not what you want to hear,
I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to put my head on my pillow, I'm going to say my prayers. And where is God in all of this? And I know I'm going to ask God, what does he want me to do? Where does he want me to be? I was at the Chicago Democratic National Convention in 1968. I was at Kent State in 1970. But I get all this, and I'm with you. If the missus lets me, I'm going to buy the book tonight.
They make great gifts.
Thank you. I'll read it and give it to my son who couldn't be here tonight. But I just, where is God in all of this?
It's a good question. Again, I won't try to answer it except just to say, think about the people in Nazi Germany, since that's kind of our context, right? There are people who did not have the benefit of looking backward through German history and seeing all the things we can see. They were faced with they had to discern on the fly, like, was this movement what people were saying it was? Was it a gift from God? Was this a new Martin Luther? Or are there things that are bothering me that I don't really want to listen to or acknowledge, right? So to me, I think this time is not different than a lot of other times, but sometimes the process of discernment gets short-circuited because we're excited or because we're scared. This is what I'm doing, is talking about it. And hopefully you'll talk to some people and they'll talk to some people, and maybe change will occur that way. But I can't change my parents' minds, I've decided. I mean, they're 91 and 89. I mean, come on. But I have family members that I can probably change. So I'm going to talk to some of them, sisters and well-meaning people who probably don't want to vote for Trump, but think Biden is a socialist and don't even know really what that means, but they know it's bad. So maybe I need to have conversations with those people who are maybe convincible, who haven't thought enough. I'm not going to call on you, but not because you don't have something great to say. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
So, you know, I think we all struggle with that same question. We look to God and we say, God, what do we do? I'm going to embarrass my wife for a second, but last week we happened to be vacationing with Michelle Bachmann's brother in North Carolina, near a beach where every other 4th of July beach setup had a Trump flag on it.
Yeah.
And it was uncomfortable. We're not Trump people. We're pretty liberal as a family. But I can tell you that it was one of the most awesome vacations because I felt loved, I felt cared for, I felt welcome. Mm-hmm. Not because of my politics, but because of human beings. And we're vacationing, we're spending time with our neighbors whom we're supposed to love. And these people did it really well. And it was a reminder for me that our job is to have conversations, to not be afraid of these conversations, and to remember to lead with love, because that's what Jesus asks us to do. Amen. And I think we're all struggling with, what do we do right now, right? And I think for our teenage kids, it's to lead an example of, we need to lead with love. Mm-hmm. And welcome people to the table and say, come over to my house, let's have that hard conversation, and not be afraid of it. Because if we're afraid of it, then worse things happen, right? And so I think that's my only comment. There
Thank
you
you. Well said. And is she embarrassed?
Yes.
Okay. Figured.
Steve, I could add.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a little comment.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that helps, or that makes Bonhoeffer so appealing, is that he saw some things clearly, but he didn't see everything clearly. And I remember hearing Karl Barth, sort of the audio recording. He came and visited the United States in 1968, and he talked about the rise of the Nazis as a moment in which it felt like all the cats were gray.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that, because from my vantage point, it's clear that some cats are white and some cats are black in that situation.
Yeah.
And I think what he was trying to say is that in the morass of history, you don't often know what to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's great about Bonhoeffer is a deliberate attending to and committing oneself to resourcing yourself, to finding the practices that ground you, that help that love not to become brittle, right? To reinforce that commitment. And that can come, you find some of this, he discusses some of this in Life Together and places like that, where he's trying to encourage people to take up ancient monastic practices.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the idea also for this forum, which is to find ways to resource ourselves as we go through what is going to be a contentious, challenging, and potentially extraordinarily challenging time.
Yeah. That's a really interesting quote. I remember that. Yeah, it's hard to think. For us, the cats never looked whiter or blacker during that time. It's like the one moment in history when we know the good guys and the bad guys. It's really clear. We can tell them by the uniforms they wore. But it didn't look that way when you were standing there. So that's really interesting. The thing about Bonhoeffer that's so amazing is he saw the black cats really clearly very early on. Nobody, I think, has really explained why that is. I have some theories. But he was 1933, he was 26.
Well, but Vicki Barnett makes it, you mentioned her in your book in the article where she talks about, Bonhoeffer did support, but also pulled back sometimes, did resist, but also wound up getting an Arian certificate so he could keep his pastoral, that's what I meant by even for Bonhoeffer, there was a certain sense in which knowing precisely what to do, you didn't have it thought out beforehand, which of course is his idea of discipleship sort of in the first place in a way.
And by the way, in case you don't know his biography really well, he did leave the country in 1939 to come to America to escape what was coming, to escape the war he knew was coming. He was here about 2 weeks. He was miserable. He didn't sleep. He got on the next boat, which turned out to be the last boat, back to Germany, because he said, if I'm going to participate in the rebuilding of Germany after the war, I have to experience this trial. And he was really thinking about the pastors that he had sort of mentored. So there were moments when he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what was best for him. Should he be drafted? Should he claim pacifism? All this stuff. Who else has a comment? Yeah.
Kind of that question about what do we do now, and then Christian's comment about calling cats white and black, and then you talked about having 3 different parts of the German church.
Yeah.
Could you help us by taking Christianity Today and some of those other national organizations, Decision, Focus on the Family, and putting them in those 3 categories of German? Can you overlap that for us?
Well,
where they might fit best?
I can maybe start to do that, and I'll start by answering about Christianity Today. So Christianity Today is the flagship evangelical publication. Billy Graham founded it. It went anti-Trump at a certain point. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it sort of repudiated Trump. And so now,
just before he retired, he supported.
Was that like?
He got a lot of heat for that. He was a longtime editor of the magazine. In fact,
But that was going on for years.
The formal minister here took over his place, Daniel Harrow.
At any rate, at some point, they went another direction. And so one of the targets for Metaxas's ire today is Christianity Today. You would think that would be one of the safe places, but they've gone, they're as bad as the New York Times now. The people I mentioned in the earlier slide, Franklin Graham, people like that, are still, Robert Jeffress, as far as I know, are still in the Trump camp. To me, that's the German Christian camp. That's the camp that says this political movement is amenable to our faith, in fact, needs our faith, and we need it. It's basically one and the same. You can be a Trumpian and a Christian, and you become something better. It's a symbiosis, right? The confessing church, I guess, would be Christianity Today, and those evangelicals who, like Russell Moore, who have had the courage to say that's enough. And then probably most people are in the middle. They don't know who they're going to vote for, or they know they don't want to tell anybody, or they're waiting around for something to happen. I don't know. You had a question though.
Not so much a question as this on. I really loved what you said about your trip, and whoever said that about the cats. Right now it's like evil, black cats, white cats. There's no in between.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up a Republican, switched to the Democrats. Now I'm frustrated with both parties.
Yeah.
And the sad part is the arguments I'm having with my liberal friends unfriend me, don't communicate with me. My conservative friends, I have some knockdown, drag-out fights on Facebook. And then, okay, and we're back to being friends. And, can I help you with that? You're having some trouble. So I can imagine what you said about your vacation. We have to approach it in love. And, okay, we disagree on this, but you're still a person. And a person that I value. So.
Charity is an important Christian sort of part of Christian character, right? We need to remember that. So I wanted to get eventually to this book, because he never stops writing books. This one just came out. I read it, so you don't have to. This is really a lot of chutzpah, because religionless Christianity is a term that Bonhoeffer uses in a letter in 1944 to Bethke, to his colleague, in which he is imagining, kind of ruminating on what the church will be like after the war's over, after he gets out of prison, and thinking about the church in a sort of secular age, in an age where Christianity doesn't have the cultural capital that it had. And so he uses this term religionless Christianity, and I am not exaggerating when I say entire books have been written on that phrase and what it means. In fact, I have one of them. I couldn't find it in my library today, but it's been a source of a lot of attempts to understand, to clarify, to imagine what Bonhoeffer meant. Metaxas doesn't need any of that. He's just going to tell you what it means. He's going to write a book with it in the title, and say what it means is for the church to be, to get political and to vote for Trump, basically. He doesn't say it quite that openly. But he has a way of taking, the one place in Bonhoeffer's theology that's like the most difficult to tease apart and the most difficult to understand, he seizes on that and said, let me explain that to you. Nobody's ever been able to do this, but it's only because they weren't me. So I'm going to tell you what religionless Christianity means. So the other thing I'll say about this book is the apocalyptic tone in it is really hard to miss. He says openly, we're living in the last days. So it's not just an existential crisis. It's not just Weimar. It's not just we've got to save our republic. It's like this is your last chance for the church to sort of avoid, I don't know what, something terrible that's coming. So I've seen a sort of escalation of Metaxas's narcissism, but also his paranoia and his attempt to push the buttons of Christians, right? Evangelical Christians, I grew up reading Hal Lindsey and watching, movies about the rapture and stuff like that. That's the currency that evangelicals speak. So you start talking about the end times, that's a whole nother reason for people to pay attention and to get really nervous. That's all I'll say about the book. That's more than enough. Yeah.
The thing that I think is wrong about religionless Christianity is Bonhoeffer goes on to say, and I think in that same letter, that he has become more comfortable with people of a lower standard, or not standard, you know what I mean, lower echelon in life than he is, more than he is with the religious people.
Yeah.
So to me, I guess I understood that, but to mean that I should be reaching out to people in need and not just hanging around with scholars and pastors and people who think like me.
Yeah, Bonhoeffer says...
The respectable people.
He's talking about a time when the church no longer the institutional church no longer has much relevance. We need to sell the property. Pastors need to get real jobs, this is what he says. And we need to get out of our bourgeois, places, and we need to go into the streets, basically. It's not exactly what Metaxas is calling for. So, yeah, it's just... I don't know. It's frustrating. But John?
Hold on, John.
John is former president of the International Bonhoeffer Society in English language section. Don't know if you guys know that, but anyway, John Matthews.
The question that I resonate with, asking what do you do next or where do we go from here? In my experience of about 45 years with this legacy is, it is wrong to go to Dietrich Bonhoeffer and say, here's what he found for answers, we learn from that and we apply it. I think a part of the Bonhoeffer moment is to be very, I couldn't say this in the church that I was a pastor at, of course. He at times didn't know what the hell he was doing. And Stephen, you already beautifully have said that, and Christian did, concerning that plot on Hitler's life. They hoped that that would be the right thing. They didn't know because there were so many other factors. So I was going to commend you, if you're sitting in this room, instead of saying, what do we take away from Bonhoeffer so I know what to do tomorrow? Socrates said it 400 years before Christ. I am wiser than that man because he thinks he knows something and he doesn't. I know I don't know anything. That makes me wiser.
Yeah.
Bonhoeffer had that kind of humility the real danger, Metaxas, it's interesting, he claims to be, I don't know if gaslighting is a version of that, where he claims to be showing who's the real enemy.
Yeah.
He's the enemy.
Yeah.
He's the domesticated one who is sucked up to the national narrative of Trump. He's the one who is doing what the Nazi Christians did.
Yeah.
Yet he's accusing the others of doing it. So if you're confused by that, join the crowd. Anybody in the room ever had this feeling? I just don't understand what's going on. My best friends and people who have a high IQ, I don't understand how they can think that way. If you begin to wonder and you don't know what that is, I commend you. Tonight is a good night to do that. But with Bonhoeffer, it's not so much he gives you an answer. He gives you a way of viewing things, which in this day and age, it's confusing as hell. So we don't know what's going on. So I just commend you. You asked that question, where do we go from here? Go away being confused. No, that's not where it has to end. But when you continue to be confused by this, take Bonhoeffer's life as a witness in that regard. It's a great question, but I share the same frustration. But his gift isn't that he gave us an answer.
You reminded me of one quote from the book, the one on the bottom, that when I read it, I thought, he's describing Trump here. He doesn't know it. The spirit behind cancel culture is one that is all about power and which is at war with anything that challenges it. It is an antichrist spirit, has no fidelity to anything except itself. It will spout platitudes about anything that might help it make some progress in accruing power. That's Trump in a nutshell. That's Trumpism. And for him to be so unaware of that is really remarkable. So that's just one example. Do we need to quit, Christian?
We have time for one or two more.
Okay.
Hold on, Deb.
Sorry, my neck is stiff. I've been listening to all of this, and I too came here tonight thinking I was going to be, excuse me, I would learn something that I didn't know, and I am a fan of Bonhoeffer, and I wanted to learn more about him and about what you were going to say. But my other reason for coming was what many of us have expressed. So where do we go from here? What do we do with what you've given us tonight? And I don't know, it's hard. I think everybody has their own way of approaching what they have learned or who they are. But for me, I have always felt like the more information I have, the more educated I can become about my own position. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can say I'm a liberal Democrat, I'm a Biden supporter, or the other side, doesn't matter, but why?
Yeah.
And so if I can engage myself in a conversation with people that doesn't confront or challenge or demean their position, and just know enough about my own position to be able to say, why do you believe that? Who said that? What are you? Why are you believing what you believe?
Yeah.
And that opens up a door for a conversation, actually, without being confrontive.
Thank you.
I don't know. And of course, the other thing is pray. That's the only thing all of us can do, is just to pray.
I'll buy the book. Thank you. I'm in the same vein here about the questions about how I'm responding and interacting with people in the midst of this. And I read a book by Tim Alberta recently, The Kingdom of Power and the Glory, and found it very helpful. And it points out things, in 1998, I think for the Southern Baptists, a statement that character matters, but that when people felt under siege, then it was no longer character, it was we need a leader, not a pastor. And so the ends justify the means.
Right.
But Tim Alberta said a couple things that I found helpful. He said that in a podcast recently that don't look at my faith through the lens of politics, look at politics through the lens of my faith. And that the Sermon on the Mount teaches us that the means are important. And if I believe in God and I follow the means God has given me in the Sermon on the Mount, that's what's most important. Not putting the ends first and letting that manipulate my behavior. And so as I'm trying to work through this again, how I respond, it still matters. Character still matters, and the Sermon on the Mount is still very relevant.
Thank you. Well said.
That was very eloquent, a nice way to wrap us up here. Well, first of all, let's thank our speaker. If you do have more additional interest, of course, in Bonhoeffer, obviously we do have 3 copies, so we only have 3. So there might be a stampede. Just be careful. But you can also get it on various platforms where you can order books. Steve has several other books as well, and I would highly commend those to you as well. In the fall, on October 12th, we're planning to host a panel that will feature several other Bonhoeffer scholars that are local. Lori Brandt Hale, Joel Lawrence, and Andy Root will be joining us, and we'll be talking about lessons from Bonhoeffer. So you might get a little bit more brass tack kind of things. And we'll be doing a Sunday school class. I'll be team teaching with Lori over the course of the fall on Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church. I know many of you already have church communities that you're committed to, so if you can't attend, of course, in person, these things are always available on YouTube. But Bonhoeffer does offer to us, I think, an excellent person for thinking about, as you said, the means. Right, because when we talk about what would we do, we might sometimes be drawn into, is this going to be successful or not? And that's probably not the right question, right? The right question is ultimately, is this right? Is this the correct way to go? So let me say a quick prayer, and then feel free to come up and talk to our speaker tonight, and God bless you all. Lord, we thank you for, again, this time. We thank you for all the work that Dr. Haynes has done over the many years of reflecting and thinking on Bonhoeffer's life, the careful scholarship that he has produced to help the church and to help people of goodwill to engage with Bonhoeffer and to think about what that means in the light of the world and life in the world. We pray that you bless him as he goes forth and does his work down in Memphis and elsewhere. And we thank you, Lord, for the time that we've had to reflect tonight together, to raise questions, sometimes to perhaps hear answers, but also to maybe have better questions as we leave. So take us forth from this place by the power of your Spirit, we ask and pray. In your name, amen. Very